Brazil is the home of football. Samba, ginga, Pele, Maracanã, yellow shirts, blue shorts, green flags, and a style of football the world has always connected with joy, rhythm, creativity, and magic. When people think of Brazilian football, they usually do not think of Italy. They think of beaches, music, street football, dribbling, carnival, the Seleção. But hidden inside the most Brazilian football story on earth, there is also an Italian thread. Not because Brazil is Italian. Brazil is Brazil, completely. But Brazil was shaped by migration, by families crossing oceans, by surnames carried from Europe to South America, by neighborhoods, clubs, factories, churches, food, language, and memory. And among those migrations, one of the strongest came from Italy. Millions of Italians arrived in Brazil, especially in São Paulo and in the south of the country. They brought dialects. They brought work. They brought family names. They brought traditions. And eventually, they also became parts of Brazilian football. So today, we are not asking whether Brazil is Italian. It is not. We are asking something more interesting. How much Italian DNA is hidden inside Brazilian football? And the answer may surprise you, because this story goes from Italian immigrants to World Cup captains, to one of the greatest left feet in football history, to Palmeiras, to Brazilian-born Azzurri, and even to Carlo Ancelotti standing on the sideline of the Seleção. This is the hidden Italian DNA of Brazilian football. Chapter 1. The Italian Brazil. Before we talk about football, we have to talk about migration, because Italian roots in Brazil did not begin in a stadium. They began at the port. They began with families leaving Italy with very little money, crossing the Atlantic, and trying to build a new life in Brazil. Many came from regions like Veneto, Lombardy, Calabria, Campania, Molise, and many others. Some went to farms, some went to factories, some built businesses, some stayed in São Paulo, others settled in the south, and over time, their children and grandchildren became Brazilian. Not half Brazilian, not almost Brazilian, Brazilian. But the Italian memory remained, in surnames, in food, in Catholic traditions, in family stories, in neighborhoods, and of course, in football. Because in Brazil, football is not just a sport. It is a language. It is identity. It is a way for families, cities, and communities to tell the world who they are. And when Italian immigrants and their descendants became part of Brazil, they also became part of that football language. That is why this story is so fascinating. Italian roots did not replace Brazilian football. They entered it quietly. They became part of the background, a hidden layer, a family echo, a surname on a team sheet, a club founded by immigrants, a captain lifting a trophy, a left foot changing the history of the game. Chapter 2. Bellini, the captain who lifted Brazil into history. The first great name in this story is Hideraldo Bellini, a Brazilian defender, a leader, a captain, and a footballer of Italian origin. Bellini was the captain of Brazil in 1958, the first time Brazil won the World Cup. That team had Pelé, Garrincha, Didi, Vavá, legends everywhere. But when Brazil defeated Sweden in the final and became world champion for the first time, it was Bellini who lifted the trophy. In that moment became history. Today, we are used to seeing captains lift trophies above their heads. It feels normal. It feels automatic. A team wins, the captain raises the cup. The crowd explodes. But Bellini helped turn that gesture into a global football ritual. He raised the Jules Rimet trophy high into the air so photographers could see it, and the image traveled around the world. Brazil had arrived. The Seleção had become world champion, and the captain who lifted Brazil into football history carried an Italian surname. That is powerful. Because Bellini is not just a small detail. He is not just a random name. He's part of the origin story of Brazil as a World Cup giant.
Before Brazil became the most decorated national team in football history, before the yellow shirt became a global symbol, before the word Seleção became mythology, there was Bellini, the captain, the defender, the son of Italian roots, the man who lifted the cup to the sky. And outside the Maracanã, his statue still remembers that gesture, a Brazilian icon with an Italian thread.
Chapter 3. Rivellino, the mustache from Molise. Then there is Roberto Rivelino, or Rivellino, as his name is often written. One of the most iconic footballers Brazil has ever produced. The mustache, the left foot, the power, the technique, the personality. Rivellino was not just good. He was one of the symbols of the legendary Brazil team of 1970, a team many people still call the greatest national team ever. Pele, Jorginho, Tostão, Gerson, Carlos Alberto, and Rivellino. That team did not just win. It created a football memory that still feels almost unreal. The yellow shirts, the movement, the goals, the confidence, the beauty. And in that team, Rivellino stood out like a force of nature. His left foot was violent and elegant at the same time. His free kicks were explosive. His passing was sharp. His dribbling was full of invention. And his famous elastico became part of football culture. To many fans, Rivellino looks like pure Brazilian magic. But his family story carries Italy inside it. His roots are connected to Machiagodena, a village in Molise. Think about that for a second. One of the most Brazilian players in the most Brazilian team of all time carried a village from Molise in his family history. That is exactly what makes the diaspora so fascinating. Identity does not move in straight lines. It travels. It changes. It mixes. It becomes something new. Rivellino was not an Italian player. He was Brazilian, deeply Brazilian. But inside his story, there was also an Italian memory, a family root, a surname, a village, a past. And that past became part of Brazilian football's golden age. Maybe that is why Rivellino is such a perfect symbol for this video. He shows that Italian roots in Brazil were not only about discipline, work, or migration. They could also become creativity, imagination, technique, a left foot that made football history. Molise did not create Brazilian football. But somewhere inside Rivellino's story, Molise traveled with him. And Brazil turned that memory into magic.
Chapter 4. Palmeiras, when Brazilian football spoke Italian. But the Italian story in Brazilian football is not only about players, it is also about clubs. And no club explains this better than Palmeiras. Today, Palmeiras is one of the biggest clubs in Brazil, a giant, a green and white powerhouse, a club with trophies, history, fans, and identity. But before it was Palmeiras, it was Palestra Italia. The club was founded in São Paulo in 1914 by members of the Italian community. At the time, São Paulo was full of Italian immigrants and their descendants, factories, neighborhoods, associations, newspapers, churches, families. And football became one of the ways that community organized itself. Palestra Italia was more than a football team. It was a symbol of belonging, a way for Italian immigrants to feel visible in Brazil, a way to say, we are here, we are part of this country, we are building something. Later, during the Second World War, the club changed its name. Palestra Italia became Palmeiras. But the origin never disappeared. The Italian foundation remained part of the club's soul. That is why Palmeiras is so important in this story, because it shows that Italian DNA in Brazilian football was not only hidden inside family names. Sometimes it was right there on the badge.
Right there in the club's birth certificate. Before Palmeiras became Palmeiras, Brazilian football had a giant called Palestra Italia, and that is one of the clearest signs of how deep the Italian presence in Brazil really was. Chapter 5. The reverse route, from Brazil to the Azzurri. But the story does not move in only one direction. Sometimes the Italian thread goes the other way, from Brazil back to Italy. That is the story of Brazilian-born players who ended up wearing the blue shirt of the Azzurri. Players like Thiago Motta, Jorginho, Rafael Tolói, and others. They were born in Brazil. They grew up with Brazilian football around them. But through Italian ancestry, citizenship, migration, and opportunity, they became part of Italian football too. This is not always simple. Some fans love it. Some fans question it. Some ask, is a player born in Brazil really Italian enough to represent Italy? But that question is exactly why diaspora stories matter. Because identity is not always clean. It is not always one flag. It is not always one language. Sometimes identity is a family name, a passport,
A grandparent, a migration story, a choice, a feeling, a career, a second home. Jorginho is a perfect example. Born in Brazil, developed through Italian football, world-class midfielder, European champion with Italy. His story is not only Brazilian, and it is not only Italian. It belongs to the space between the two. Thiago Motta is another example. Born in Brazil, Italian roots, a career in Europe, then the Azzurri. These players show that the connection between Brazil and Italy is not just history. It is still alive. It still moves. From Brazil to Italy, from Italy to Brazil, from family memory to national team shirts. Football makes these identities visible, sometimes beautifully, sometimes controversially,
But always powerfully. Chapter 6. Ancelotti. Italy comes back to the Seleção. And now, the Italian thread has returned in a new way. Not through a surname on the pitch. Not through an immigrant club. Not through a player choosing the Azzurri. But through the coach, Carlo Ancelotti. One of the most successful managers in football history. Italian, calm, experienced, elegant. A man who has coached some of the biggest clubs and biggest stars on earth. And now, he stands on the sideline of Brazil, the Seleção. Think about how strange and powerful that is. For decades, Italy was hidden inside Brazilian football through families, names, clubs, and migration. Now, Italy is standing on the touchline, giving instructions, reading the game, trying to guide the most famous football nation in the world. Brazil has always represented fantasy, emotion, attack, and rhythm. Italy has often represented tactics, structure, intelligence, and control. Of course, these are stereotypes. Brazil can be tactical.
Italy can be creative, but football cultures still carry images in our minds, and Ancelotti brings those images together. Italian calm, Brazilian pressure, Italian experience, Brazilian expectation, Italian football brain, Brazilian football soul. It does not mean Brazil has become Italian. That would be wrong. But it does mean the story has come full circle. The Italian thread that once arrived in Brazil through immigrant ships now appears again at the highest level of Brazilian football. This time, not hidden. This time, visible, on the bench, in front of the world, wearing the responsibility of the Seleção.
Chapter 7. Brazil is still Brazil. So what does all of this mean? Does it mean Brazilian football is secretly Italian? No. Brazilian football is Brazilian. Completely.
Its soul belongs to Brazil. Its rhythm belongs to Brazil. Its joy, pressure, pain, and beauty belong to Brazil. But Brazil itself was shaped by many migrations: African, indigenous, Portuguese, Italian, Japanese, German, Arab, and many others. Brazilian identity is not simple. It is a mixture, a collision, a creation, a country that turned many roots into something new. And football did the same. Brazilian football took everything around it and transformed it. Street culture, music, poverty, joy, pain, improvisation, immigration, family, faith, and yes, even Italian roots. Bellini lifted Brazil's first World Cup.
Rivellino carried Molise inside Brazilian magic. Palestra Italia became Palmeiras. Brazilian-born players wore the blue of Italy. And Carlo Ancelotti brought Italy back to the Seleção from the sideline. None of this takes anything away from Brazil. It only makes the story richer. Because football history is never pure. It is migration. It is memory. It is names crossing oceans. It is children becoming something their grandparents could never imagine. It is a Brazilian captain with Italian roots lifting the World Cup. It is a left foot from Sao Paulo carrying a village from Molise. It is a green club in Brazil, born from Italian immigrants. It is a Brazilian-born midfielder becoming European champion with Italy. It is an Italian coach leading the Seleção. So the next time someone says Brazilian football is only samba, remember this. Inside the rhythm, there is also memory. Inside the yellow shirt, there are many histories. And hidden inside Brazilian football, there is an Italian thread. A thread made of ships, surnames, club, families, trophies, and dreams. Brazil is Brazil, but part of its football story also speaks Italian. So now I want to ask you, which name surprised you the most? Bellini, Rivellino, Palmeiras, Jorginho, Thiago Motta, Ancelotti? And who else should be in this story? Write your answer in the comments. And subscribe for more stories about Italian roots, migration, football, culture, and the hidden Italian DNA inside the world.